people would take their seats, please. All right, the next item on the agenda includes myself and the two lovely people that you see on the screen, who are Shirley TAGALIK and KARETAK. And it's so wonderful for me to reconnect with both of these people. In fact, I wouldn't be here if it weren't for Shirley TAGALIK. But that's a long story. The title of our presentation, and although I'm actually not, strictly speaking, in the schedule, I have been asked to lead off. The title of our presentation is the Arviat Curriculum and School Services Language and IQ, probably my curriculum model, origins, failure, and the future. And this isn't just a trip down memory lane for me. This is actually something that I think is relevant for First Nations communities and linguistic nations that are thinking of setting up a strong bilingual or strong language and culture curriculum for their nations. And the experience that we had included origins, included failure, and will include the future. So I'm going to lead off. The creation of Nunavut in 1999 was a response to a long, hard struggle for a land claim for the Inuit of the Eastern Northwest Territories. The government of Nunavut was established against a background of specific expectations for change and a well-articulated vision for the future for Nunavut. In the document Pinaswaktaut, that which we have set out to do, key among the messages for the new government in 1999 is the following quotation. By 2020, we will be a fully functioning bilingual society in Inuktitut and English with increased opportunities to learn French. And as Luca just said, we only have a few weeks left to fulfill this dream, this audacious dream of 1999. This means that to achieve the goal included a made in Nunavut legislation to foster the use of Inuktitut in the workplace and in the public and private sectors. To promote Inuktitut as the working language of government. That land and language skills and respectful pride in Inuit civilization and language would be fundamental for adults and children. To support and improve the teaching and learning of Inuktitut in all its local forms in Nunavut school. And there was a 20-year plan to achieve these goals. Research was commissioned to assist with defining a model or models for this approach to language of instruction in Nunavut schools. And I contributed to one of these research studies. On the basis of community wishes, we surveyed 7 communities and found that there was a desire for strong bilingualism. The goal of making Inuktitut as the principal language of instruction throughout the education system was widely supported. the early exit transitional model, whereby Inuktitut ceases to be the language of instruction after grade 3, is seriously flawed and was seriously flawed. A model, however, first developed in KARETAK, called the KARETAK model, was a strong maintenance model of bilingual education, with Inuktitut as a significant language of instruction throughout the grades. This would be developed alongside a high-quality English as a second language program, so that English could be a language of instruction alongside Inuktitut in high school. Despite the apparent vitality of Inuktitut, it is still vulnerable, as we've heard, especially in larger communities such as Iqaluit, where there's a pattern of subtractive bilingualism, meaning that with increasing knowledge of English, there's a strong correlation with loss of Inuktitut. A possible model in schools where there are both Inuit and Talunat students could be a dual language model in which a two-way bilingual immersion option could be considered if parents on both sides, and there are examples of Talunat parents who are long-term residents of Nunavut who would like their children to be fluent in Inuktitut. So a dual language model could be considered. Also, the Kitikmeot region, where the local form of Inuktitut, called Inuktitut, is seriously endangered, needs special treatment, and the community needs to be involved in order to design the most suitable bilingual education model for their community, including Inuit language immersion. So those three models were put forward, but they were not put forward as just options, but they were all aimed at, in one way or another, leading to strong graduates, high level of graduation from high school, with strong reading and writing in both English and Inuktitut. And the report also supported a number of infrastructural initiatives, such as a Nunavut Education Act, to ensure a commitment to a strong bilingual education system. It recommended an Inuit Language Commission to oversee the promotion and development of Inuktitut in all its forms, to deal with issues of dialect maintenance, and support the development of pedagogical material for the schools. And it recommended an Inuit Educators Association to promote the interests of professional Inuit language educators. And finally, the creation of a comprehensive teachers college in which Inuit educators could be recruited and developed in all communities. And we've heard that there are almost 1,000 substitute teachers, Inuit teachers all over the territory who could be given an additional opportunity to become full-fledged teachers. But the idea of a teachers college in which the educators could be recruited and developed, and the development of a maiden Nunavut curriculum grounded in Inuit values centered on Inuit IQ. Yes, a high IQ education system. At the time of the founding of Nunavut, Inuktitut was a language of instruction in some elementary schools, but always with the early exit model. After grade 3, students were transitioned into learning a language through the medium of a language that they didn't know very well, English. Inuit was not taught in any school as a first language. Inuktitut was only available in high school as a second language and as a subject, not as a language of instruction. And the number of Inuit teachers was not increasing. There was a curricular plan called Untitled that had been developed under the NWT, and a K-6 Inuit language arts curriculum, but very few curriculum resources beyond grade 3. The Education Department established a language of instruction steering committee and initiated a collaboration with elders and other partners who work on the promotion and enhancement of the language. And this is where Arviat and the Curriculum School Services branch under Shirley TAGALIK played a key role during the first decade of the creation of Nunavut. So, to finish, a combination of territorial legislation, the 3 items of legislation, all created in 2008, where the Official Languages Act of Nunavut, the Inuit Language Protection Act, which still is the only piece of legislation in Canada that focuses on the promotion and preservation and use of a particular Indigenous language, and the Nunavut Education Act, which ensured, at least on paper, in 2008, that by 2019, graduates would be granted the right, and parents in Nunavut would be granted the right to have their children educated through the medium of Inuktitut from K to grade 12. That's the act that the current government of Nunavut is seeking to repeal. So, elements: legislation, community language planning, Inuit language across the curriculum, recruiting and preparing Inuit educators and ongoing professional development, curriculum and resource development, language program accountability framework, and of course, the fact that all of this had to be grounded in Inuit values, IQ values. So that was the start of a very exciting curriculum development project, which was handled under the aegis of the Arviat Curriculum and School Services branch of the Department of Education. And I believe it's going to be Shirley TAGALIK, who, as director of that Curriculum and School Services branch, is going to continue the story.
Thank you, Ian. So I'll just sit up here. So the research that Ian did for us was done right at the beginning of the creation of what was then Early Childhood and School Services. At the time that we invited Ian to initiate the research, there were 2 employees, Naudla Arnakok and myself. But given the work that Ian outlined in his research document for us, we very quickly staffed up, and we developed an approach where we brought in elders, experts, educators from right across Nunavut to work on in these steering committees in the number of areas that Ian identified. The outcome of that was a language of instruction foundation document for Nunavut schools. And in the presentation, all of the text in these slides comes directly out of that foundation document. There were 5 foundation documents that we developed. There were 2 that were never published. The 2 that were never published was the language of instructions for Nunavut schools document, and the other one was the Inuit pedagogy for Nunavut educators. So this is one of the big concerns that we had, is that we could. Some people say, you know, the office in Arviat never did anything, but in fact, we were working flat out, but what we were doing didn't always move forward. So one of the things that Ian talked about, and which was of prime importance to us, was the idea that that language vitality needs to be supported in all of our communities, across the communities. It can't only happen in schools. And so we did a huge Nunavut-wide consultation, which looked at what should a good school look like, what kinds of things should we be focusing on, what does a good teacher look like, and the other thing that we really focused on were standards. What kinds of standards do we need for our students? What kind of exit standards we want? In that consultation, youth told us, you realize that when we leave grade 12, whatever level of Inuktitut we're speaking is the level of Inuktitut that we're going to be coming into our government jobs with. And so if you want us to be highly functioning, you have to make sure that we leave the high school system at a highly functioning in Inuktitut. So with that in mind, we started developing the high school curriculum, and we were moving down until there was a language of instruction policy in place that would give us the ability to develop the elementary curriculum. But at the same time, we started, because we were early childhood and school services, we were developing the early childhood curriculum. So we were developing the high school curriculum and the early childhood curriculum simultaneously. We were also developing supports that we could take into communities so that we could work with DEAs and parents so that they could understand the results of the research that Ian did and where we were wanting to move with language of instruction. We had a huge focus on elders. When I received the mandate to develop the curriculum division, our mandate was to redesign an education system that would be grounded in IQ. And so obviously we had to understand IQ. And so we worked in every single area, in every single aspect under the direction of elders. I had 6 elders on staff, and Joe facilitates to this day elder meetings twice a year where we bring elders from across Nunavut to advise the curriculum division. The other key focus area was on early childhood. We were concerned that language can be lost in a matter of 5 years, in one generation. And if we really didn't focus very quickly on how to improve language in our homes and in our early years programs, then it wasn't something that we could just do in the school. So we looked for best practices around the world. We worked closely with Maori people on the Language Nest model. We worked with the Alaskan Tumkanka model that brought language into homes and did home visiting. At the same time, we sent our elders to Alaska to really see how that model was implemented firsthand. And then we worked with groups of elders to develop Inungwinak kind of profiles, and that was done from pregnancy up to 18-year-olds. And the focus of those profiles were how to build character in children, how to build strong communication in children, and how to build skills that would enable our children to be strong and capable. One of the biggest pieces of that was that language cannot be separated from culture and shouldn't be, and therefore all of our language teaching had to be culture-based. The strategy that we developed for early childhood education was developing curriculum for use in early childhood programs, but also a home visiting program where we went into homes to provide additional supports in terms of child development and linguistics and language acquisition, but also to help parents improve their own language skills so that they would be better able to support their children throughout. So as part of that, and especially for the Inuinnaqtun experience, we organized language revitalization training for many people who were working in both early childhood and early school programs that might require an immersion approach. One of the models, I just want to say, one of the models that we looked closely at was the very success of the Six Nation model. So we were working with the best jurisdictions right across Canada. But it was decided by the deputy ministers and the minister in Iqaluit at the time that the whole point of early childhood education was actually just to allow adults to go back to school. And so the early childhood piece of curriculum and school services was moved to adult learning, and it just became about daycares, and all of this work never went forward. At the same time we were doing this, we were looking at what language-rich cross-curricular learning should look like. And we were wanting to look at it from an L1 and an L2 perspective. And so we had a summer institute that Joanne Tompkins was part of, and many other people. We worked with elders, and we created a strategy and a pedagogy for how to create language-rich classrooms and how to do L2 learning, both L2 Inuktitut, but also L2 English learning. And in 2001, we published the guidelines for teaching in a bilingual setting, and got that into schools, into the hands of teachers, so that they could begin to redesign their classrooms and their approach around strengthening both languages in their classrooms with students. Another key was the teaching component. We, in the Inuit pedagogy document, we really outlined how, from an IQ perspective, teaching and learning needed to be experiential. It needed to be grounded in culture. In the elementary school, we promoted an integrated thematic approach. We used the Inukatigi curriculum to help us identify those integrated themes and identify the competencies that would be expected at each level for students to achieve. Elders also told us that paper and pencil learning is meaningless and competencies must be able to be demonstrated. And so we built a whole dynamic assessment strategy around how to demonstrate competencies. We also promoted and went out to schools. We piloted this in 6 schools in Nunavut, an inductive organic language that was grounded in cultural experiences. And this was to become the pedagogy for the elementary school curriculum. We also taught this to some NTEP classes, and it was used for a while in our schools, but it was never resource supported or made supported in policy. And so I think many of the schools who piloted it, some are still using it, but for others it's gone by the wayside. And we also established the policy that progress is continuous, and we start where the child is at, and we develop each child's linguistic ability, their skills and abilities on a continuum, and that these continuums are identified through our competency charts. But again, although all of this work was done, it was never put into the school system. And one of the big concerns for us was that, in fact, we were told we weren't allowed to meet or deal with DEAs. We weren't allowed to go into schools, that was the domain of the regional offices. And so in the end, one of the failures, one of our failures in terms of getting this work out to the schools and in the hands of teachers was that we were contained in the Arviat office and not allowed to put any of this forward. So I'll turn it over to Joe.
You don't want to have questions.
No, after.
Hey, I appreciate the opportunity to be able to talk about this. I mean, we've talked to Shirley about wishing to have an opportunity to be able to have a short timeline of some kind to explain, I think, what we've tried to do at the Arviat office. And one of the things I realized was when I first started working with elders is how much cultural knowledge and skills I had missing in my life. And so it was a struggle for me at the beginning, realizing that all these things I should have known at my age, I didn't even know they existed. But one of the things that helped, I think, us to move forward was the concept of IQ pedagogy. And it was a very interesting learning for me to hear about this concept called Inungwinak and Pidimagsannet. And Inungwinak is the foundation piece for an individual, which is going to be applied right from birth. Um, and it's really more to stabilize the individual and to have like how you pass that on is through teaching them values and right from the beginning. And one of the things is that when you work on an individual's foundation base first, it'll be there all the time. And this is important because the next component, which is Billy Magsamner, is a skills and knowledge acquisition component. And these two work together. Um, if you look at drawing here, I don't know if you can notice, but the one in the middle image part is the harpoon point that is called a sekku. And if you look at the sides there, there's the image of the ulu, women knife. So one of the things from an IQ perspective is that if you are from a hunter-gatherer society economy system, you and in this very difficult conditions of human existence, partnership is something that was emphasized and we are taught how to. They would have been taught how to have a good working relationship with men and women in our society. So the Inungwena part was something that we struggled with because people had lost the word. I think from the impact of colonialism, Inungwena was something that we noticed as that we're researching, and from the elders telling us was that when they created residential school, this stopped the continuation of Inungwena because it had to be passed on to the child. And when they were separated from their parents, this is one of the first components which Inuit society required all parents to raise their children to be a human being because it was something that the society need in terms of being able to manage the existence in a very harsh place. So
Joe,
the IQ,
see in here, could you raise the image that you referred to, the harpoon and the loom? Because I think people here wanted to see it, but they couldn't see it very clearly. Is it possible to raise that up?
Raise it up.
Or, yeah, we can see it on this, on our screen here.
In front of the camera.
Oh,
it's on our laptop
It's a-
screen. It's on full screen, so I'm not sure if we're able to do that.
Okay,
We'd
all
have.
right. If you can't do it, you can't do it. That's fine. Okay, keep going.
Okay. And one of the things that, you know, when you look at the way Inuit looked at enabling a person, they look at the beginning of life to the end of life. And that it's a continuous learning process. And really, you could say that this is the holistic approach that Inuit had. And so this was a very important component in terms of trying to make people understand this. And it's really difficult for us to understand that we're taught in the education system. Like I started going to school when I was 6 years old. like I think most Canadians in the 60s. But the problem was I went from an Inuktitut only speaking society or family, and when I went to the school, it's only English. And even as a child, I realized there was a very different approach. And as a child, it was confusing because each of the adults on both sides of the spectrum expected you to behave the way that they wanted you to from their own cultural perspectives. So as a child, you try to learn you actually have a switch. So as soon as you start going home, you switch to Inuktitut way of thinking. On your way to school, as soon as you walk into the school system, you switch to the Western society system. And this is the one I was talking about where it was something I really felt when it was talked about when we were inquiring about teaching, child rearing, and the role that making a human being was such an important component. One of the things we were told right off the bat, and this was very interesting to me, was that Inuit understood that we make three types of people by the way we raise them. We can make a fragile person, we can make a hardened person, or we can make a human being. And to me, it was something that was explained to me because I couldn't understand when I first heard this. So one of the things was that what happens to a person when they become a fragile person, it's not their fault they became fragile. It's because of the way they were raised. So they might have had the compassion, the love, but they never applied the pilim magsangit part, which is enabling a person to have skills and knowledge. And that's how you end up making a fragile person. And with a hardened person, what they're lacking is the inungwinak part, which is to make them to be a human being. You might have taught them only to have skills and knowledge. And so if you look at that situation with both of them in balance and properly administered to a child, you make the human being that will not only have the concept of being a human being, also be able to stand by the values and beliefs that are crucially important, because in the harsh conditions, sometimes knowledge and skills isn't enough. And very often you have to rely on weathering out the difficulties. And if you're made to be a human being, it makes you have that foundation and perseverance you require without losing hope, no matter how bad things get. So to us, when we first heard this, I was upset in saying that you knew this knowledge all this time and you didn't tell us this. And at that time, I hadn't realized how much impact colonization had. And I didn't realize they were being told, they were told literally forced to let go of their values and beliefs. And when they did that, all these concepts went with it. When I first started hearing about balanced literacy, my first thought was that how can you talk about balanced literacy in the schools when it's already imbalanced? Like there's no Inuktitut that, like we lost so much Inuktitut already in our society. And first of all, we were told not to have Inuktitut or speak Inuktitut in the classroom. And so it was even the thought of talking about balanced literacy was upsetting to me, because the situation is already so imbalanced. One of the situations that I've experienced is that though we spoke Inuktitut only in our homes, when children are exposed to English, they immediately start speaking English. And and the English language is something that's really powerful. It's something that we struggled with, and to this day, to have Inuktitut spoken by our children in a fluent, proper manner. So we need to recognize the current imbalance. And if you don't do that, then it's going to continue to deteriorate. The other thing, that the only way you can engage this and read this well is if you looked at it from a holistic perspective. And when you talk about being holistic, we have to engage parents, the homes, the community as partners to help the education system promote and and I think that's one thing that when there was a lot of people saying, especially a lot of the teachers were saying, if you teach Inuktitut in the school system, it's going to make them know less by the time they graduate. So there's a lot of impact from colonization impact. There's a lot of things that are working against this. So because people often look at it without the history, they only see the present. And if you're able to look at it holistically, you would try to at least look at it from the history, how we are today, and the future we're going into. So the strategy and philosophy grounded in, QQ, the way the schools are administered, this is something that we really struggle. I've really struggled with from the beginning, is that we develop all these programs to have an IQ perspective to it. But when it comes to administrating it, it goes to a QQ system to be administered. And this pretty much undoes everything we just did, unfortunately. And so this situation continues to colonize. And one of the things I've heard is that, well, it's the people in the past that were colonizing. Yeah, but if you look at it, people that are benefiting from a QQ setting are the Western people, because that is their own culture. And what that has been doing is deteriorating the Inuit culture. So really, we are still losing out very rapidly. And as each generation comes, there's less Inuktitut that is coming down. And so, unfortunately, even if you didn't start it, we are still part of the colonization process. And so we have to look at how this has been happening from a further into the history. Because one of the things I was always open about was, I thought that we have to talk, like, if we want to solve the problem, we have to first understand it. And when we weren't allowed to even talk about colonization because some people believed it didn't happen, and you have to understand that people come from different paradigms, it's really makes it difficult to do the work we were doing, to come out of our office, out of our building, to get distributed. So one of the things that we, so what do we do from here? One of the things that I felt that, as Shirley explained, our division, which was the curriculum division, used to be the early childhood, had a component with that. We had, when we first started working together, one of the first exercises we did was, how are we going to work together to achieve Pinasuaktavut mandate, which had IQ as the foundation for the education system, and without compromising the core subjects in English. So one of the things that, one exercise we did do was that, as a person that had to bridge, so you had, if you have to look at this bilingually, you have unilingual Inuit people working with unilingual English speaking people. How are they going to communicate? So you have to have 3 people here. And then in the middle are the bilingual people. And the struggle we had was, we neither knew that like for a person like myself, I didn't know enough about my own culture, and I didn't have enough education to actually be in the curriculum division at the beginning. So, so this is something that being in the middle, you lack knowledge of both sides. And you don't feel comfortable as saying, I know about Inuit, I know about the Western system. You can only pretty much speak both languages. That's about it. So one of the things that exercises we tried to do at the beginning was we have to create a good working relationship. And if it's going to be grounded in IQ, we asked the elders to, if they had any questions they've always wanted to ask white people. And they asked some questions that always puzzled them about white people. I can't remember, so I'm not going to try to say what that was.
She's so diplomatic.
Yeah, and we then they, you know, the Western people answered, and you know, so you know that sort of broke the ice. So when we asked the Western people about things they've always wanted to ask Inuit people, this is something that we had started with, and this is how we started the working relationship. And it was very dependent upon the people in the middle. And this is something Aluki was saying about the interpreters and translators. They play such a crucial component. We also need to start focusing on supporting the people in the middle so we can achieve the goals of the IQ perspective and help also help the QQ perspective work well together. I think our time is up. I'll just end at this point.
Thank you very much, Joe. Thank you very much, Shirley. Yes, I think we do have some time though for questions or comments from the floor before I call upon Derek to complete our morning. If there are questions or comments that you would like to direct to Shirley, Joe, or myself, please do so. Yes.
I have not so.
I'm not sure if you can see me there.
Yes, I think you can see
And
Marcia Ireland speaking, gesturing, signing.
Am I good where I am?
Yes?
Yes.
Yes, you are.
Thank you. I want to strongly encourage you to continue with your IQ education and your work with your elders and your language. I think there needs to be a disconnect, or there already is a disconnect between what the government and the Western ways are in comparison to your own. So perhaps just getting in your own mindset and supporting your goals of ensuring that your future children and adults have both components so that they become human. And I want to, hopefully I can persuade you to support that education that happens every single day, as you mentioned, from parents and communities and in people's homes. So if I can instill that on you, I appreciate the research that you've done and your work. Thank you.
Did you hear that, Shirley and Joe?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that encouragement. I have retired from the Department of Education. Joe and I still work closely together. We've just come from one of those elders meetings that Joe facilitates, and we're on our way to a community to deliver a 5-day workshop on Inungwinak. We're committed to moving the amazing information about Inuit Kaimayaktukangit that we receive from elders to moving that forward in any way we can. We helped elders publish a book called Inuit Koyumayakta Kangid, what we've always known to be true. We're working on a second book. And we're delivering these Inuwinak workshops to communities, to parents, to community organizations to try and continue to get this information out to as many people as possible. I just want to add one of the, the kind of questions that the elders asked us when I was working in the department were things like, Shirley, why do you Kablanak think that if a kid can do something 50% of the time, they should pass? If I built an igloo 50% of the time, I'd be dead. So their questions were so poignant, so strong, that it was those questions that actually led to the changes that we made in the design of an IQ curriculum. It's just really unfortunate that so little of that work has gone forward in schools, but we haven't given up.
Could you give us again the title of the book and the publisher? Because I think people here may be interested in obtaining
Yeah.
it, right?
The book is called Inuit Koyumayakta Kangid, what we've always known to be true.
I just was given a copy. Here it is.
Okay.
For people who would like to.
And it's published by Fernwood Press, but it's also available on Amazon or in some bookstores.
Excellent. Thank you very much. A friend of yours has just come up to the microphone. Joanne.
I'm coming here just so I can see you. Hello, Shirley.
Yeah.
And none of us have aged in 20 years, right? What I guess I want to ask you is, I mean, it's the work you uncovered and are uncovering, it was just so beautiful and philosophical. That word, and psychological. I mean, it was just such deep knowledge. If you were doing it again, because you're really trying to bring this into a very Eurocentric Kablanak structure, and as you say, this work didn't penetrate, what would be the lessons learned? Because I think everyone in this room is going to want to journey down this road. What you didn't have the penetration in the system. What should have been different, or can you see now, what we couldn't see then, right? Because we thought we were all working on these systems together, and clearly, as we're seeing today, there's all the systems of power that want to maintain themselves.
I think, we were working in a decentralized office, and, I hugely support decentralization, but they didn't decentralize decision-making. So Joe always said, we're here, we're throwing logs on the fire, but in Iqaluit, they haven't opened the dampers. And so we were heads down, really trying to meet our 2020 deadline, doing all this work. But there were gatekeepers who were making all of the decisions in Iqaluit, and there was this separation, so that the director for our division lived in Iqaluit, wasn't meeting with us, wasn't working with us, didn't understand the philosophy even of the work. And so whatever she didn't understand, she either didn't approve or didn't allow to go forward, or, so we had hundreds of elders, educators coming together to create all of this work, but then it was only up to one person to decide whether this would be allowed to go forward or not. And that is a QQ system. That's not how an IQ system would operate. And so, Aluki spoke to this earlier. we have in Nunavut a political system that is not grounded in IQ. And until we address that in terms of how policy and legislation can really support Inuit aspirations, then, you know, we're always going to have these kinds of roadblocks. Do you want to say something?
Well, one of the things that even in, say, the daycare system where they have primarily higher number of Inuit children in the preschool classrooms, if you want to call them, when English speaking only child comes in, they all start to accommodate that one English speaking child. And I think this is something that either we're overlooking, but it seems to be really automatic. And one of the things that I think we have difficulty with is that the paradigm of which we came from is puts us on auto mode to look at and assess everything in this world to determine how things go. And that part is really hard to change. Like, if anything I learned that I didn't know before was the concept of paradigm. Like, when you're a unilingual Inuit group and you're a hunter-gatherer system, everybody's a hunter. Everybody is a homemaker. It's and everybody you look at, their professional role or in a society is the same thing. So you can understand that when you suddenly go into a system that has multiple different ways of existing and different jobs, that's the reality that I think I personally didn't know was going to have such an impact on the difficulty. So it's not just administration, though that has a lot to do with it. The different dynamics of trying to merge two cultures to work well together, you know, sometimes it's hard enough to have just one culture work well together, you know, so you're talking about two systems here. And I think that there has to be willingness from the QQ side, the Western side, to acknowledge and say that maybe we don't understand exactly, but I think we will trust that you do need these things for your culture and language to do well. And sometimes that's very hard to do as a large entity. But one of the things that I found encouraging was that Inuit had a holistic perspective, which I believe is a management concept. And they're able to accommodate the Western system because they're open. When we ask the Western system to accommodate us, it's very closed in, and it's always protecting itself. So just that by nature makes it impossible to work like an equal partnership. And we still have to work at trying to create equal partnership. So as I said, there is an imbalance. And one of the things that I've said was that unfortunately with the Western system, if we lose our culture and language, they don't lose anything. It's only us that lose out. So I think we're asking them to, you know, have compassion towards that, create some understanding towards that, that though you may lose or gain nothing for what we're trying to ask this education system to do, it is for our well-being. And I think we are very unique culture. So, you know, there's something we can give back. And I think it's something that, like, all of the concepts that I understand is because my parents taught me how to have a holistic perspective approach and be principle-based application. So to me, all these things like better working relationship, we have to continue to try to establish those.
Thank you very much. And I think maybe that's the next book if you're looking for things. I'm glad you're keeping to bring your work to other places. Wonderful. Thank you.
And thank you for continuing to be bold and audacious wherever you are, and never retire, Shirley, never retire. And Joe, it's so wonderful to see you again. Thank you very, very much for this. It's beautiful to reconnect with you. All the best to both of you.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you.